In the endless night of the 41st millennium, where survival demands unyielding resolve and strength, few figures stand as imposing as Rogal Dorn. He is the primarch of the Imperial Fists, a warrior whose legacy and loyalty to the Emperor shaped the Imperium's survival against unspeakable odds. Dorn's role in the Great Crusade, his staunch defenses during the Horus heresy, and his lasting influence on the structure and doctrine of imperial warfare marked him as a towering figure of resilience and determination. Rogal Dorn was not merely a soldier, but an embodiment of fortification itself, often called the Praetorian of Terra for his strategic genius in siege warfare. With an iron will and a heart unwavering in devotion to the Emperor, Dorn became one of the Emperor's most trusted sons. His rigorous, almost ascetic nature set him apart from his brothers, creating a reputation for Dorn as a strict, sometimes harsh figure, yet one whose loyalty was unmatched. This narrative traces the extraordinary life and actions of Rogal Dorn, a figure both revered and feared across the Imperium. From his early days, Dorn was molded by duty and loyalty, qualities that would later position him as a defender of humanity during its darkest hours. His story is one of loyalty, sacrifice, and indomitable spirit, qualities that would secure his place as an eternal guardian of the Emperor's vision, even in death. Through a series of pivotal battles, masterful defenses, and tragic sacrifices, Dorn would leave an indelible mark on the Imperium. His choices, both in life and in battle, would define the course of Imperial history and cement his legacy as an icon of stoic, unbreakable fortitude. Join us as we explore the life, battles, and legacy of Rogal Dorn and the profound impact he has had on the Imperium of man. Rogal Dorn's life was shaped and defined by the Imperium, yet he was also its shaper, its builder, and in many ways, its stern guardian. To understand Dorn's story, we must examine the key players and entities around him, the forces and figures that influenced, challenged, and sometimes even clashed with his unbending loyalty to the Emperor. Each of these allies, enemies, and rivals played a role in sculpting his path and shaping his ultimate legacy. At the center of Dorn's life stood, unarguably, the Emperor of mankind himself. The Emperor's vision of a unified, protected humanity resonated deeply with Dorn, more so than with many of his other primarch brothers. For Dorn, the Emperor was a figure of near-divine reverence, one he trusted implicitly and for whom he would sacrifice without question. Dorn's dedication to the Emperor was not merely the loyalty of a son to a father, but a fierce commitment to a ruler's vision that he believed in wholeheartedly. This bond created an almost religious fervor within Dorn, compelling him to see his duty as sacred, his role as an instrument of humanity's salvation. In the Emperor, Dorn saw a purpose, a calling that would justify every sacrifice he would make. However, loyalty to the Emperor brought Dorn into both cooperation and conflict with his primarch brothers. Each of the primarchs was gifted and unique, yet Dorn was among the few who approached his duty with absolute rigor and a nearly unyielding stoicism. While many brothers admired Dorn's strengths, his rigid adherence to principle sometimes placed him at odds with them. His closest allies among the primarchs included Robert Guilliman of the Ultramarines and Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels. Both Guilliman and Dorn shared a vision of order and discipline, valuing strategy and loyalty, although they approached these qualities differently. Guilliman, with his encyclopedic mind, emphasized structure and planning, while Dorn saw war as a matter of fortitude and resilience. Despite their differences, Guilliman respected Dorn's reliability, and the two shared a kinship in their dedication to the Imperium. Lionel Johnson was another figure Dorn held in esteem, as the Lion's ferocity and unwavering sense of duty mirrored Dorn's own stern resolve. The two, while not always ideologically aligned, shared mutual respect born from their battlefield experience and effectiveness as commanders. Each recognized that they were willing to make the hard choices, to sacrifice for the greater good. This kinship, however, was rarely spoken of openly. Rather, it was expressed through action and mutual support in critical campaigns. The quiet respect between Dorn and L. Johnson was a testament to their shared understanding of the weight of command. Not all interactions were positive, however. Dorn's stalwart ideals put him in frequent conflict with Perturabo, the primarch of the Iron Warriors. Where Dorn sought to defend and preserve, Perturabo felt restricted and stifled by the same ideals. Both masters of siege warfare, they approached their craft from radically different philosophies. Dorn believed in fortifications as bulwarks of protection, a way to shield the weak and hold back the darkness, while Perturabo resented the burden of endless, thankless work. Perturabo's bitterness toward the Emperor, coupled with Dorn's often dismissive stance, fueled an animosity that would later evolve into open enmity. This rivalry between the two primarchs symbolized a fundamental division in how they viewed the imperium itself, as a promise to be safeguarded or as a prison from which to escape. The other prominent influence on Dorn's journey was his legion, the Imperial Fists. Formed in Dorn's own image, the Imperial Fists were loyal, resilient, and willing to endure any hardship for the sake of the Emperor's will. Their doctrine of defense and sacrifice mirrored Dorn's principles and inspired a fierce loyalty to him. His legion saw him not just as a leader, but as a model of fortitude, and they strove to uphold his standards in every campaign. In return, Dorn's commitment to his legion was unbreakable. He saw them as the embodiment of his ideals, and he demanded from them what he demanded from himself: unyielding strength, loyalty, and sacrifice. Throughout the Great Crusade, the Imperial Fists became known as the Imperium's first and last line of defense. Dorn's legion was often deployed to fortify newly conquered worlds or to hold territories against insurmountable odds. His Space Marines took on the motto, "Pain is an illusion of the senses, despair, an illusion of the mind," words that encapsulated their refusal to break, no matter the cost. This unyielding spirit earned them admiration from allies and fear from enemies as they established themselves as defenders of humanity, unbending in the face of any threat. But not all of Dorn's key players were allies or even mortal beings. The ruinous powers, the dark gods of chaos, lurked ever in the shadows, corrupting and whispering to humanity's greatest warriors. During the Horus heresy, these entities would ensnare several primarchs, including Horus, Magnus, and Angron, in their webs. They aimed to subvert the Emperor's vision and shatter the unity he had created. Dorn, ever vigilant, recognized the creeping influence of chaos and saw it as the ultimate enemy, a threat not just to the Imperium, but to humanity's very soul. His hatred for these dark forces went beyond the physical. It was personal, as Dorn would never forgive those who betrayed the Emperor, especially those who had once been his trusted brothers. In many ways, Dorn's greatest foe was Horus, the favored son who turned against the Emperor and plunged the Imperium into the devastating civil war that became the Horus heresy. Horus, once Dorn's brother-in-arms, became his most dangerous adversary, and the betrayal struck Dorn deeply. Dorn had been present during many campaigns alongside Horus, and his fall to chaos marked a wound from which Dorn would never fully recover. To Dorn, Horus embodied the ultimate betrayal, one that twisted the ideals they had once fought to uphold. Dorn's duty was now to thwart Horus, and his resolve to protect Terra and the Emperor's dream only intensified with this betrayal. In the end, each of these figures, the Emperor, his primarch brothers, his loyal legion, and even the sinister forces of chaos, played a role in defining Rogal Dorn's path. They were both his companions and adversaries, reflections of his principles and trials of his resolve. Each of them pushed Dorn toward his destiny, carving out his legacy as the Praetorian of Terra and an icon of unbreakable loyalty. For Dorn, every ally, every enemy, and every betrayal was a reminder of his singular purpose, to defend the Emperor's vision of a united humanity. And in that purpose, Dorn found both his strength and his sacrifice. Long before the Horus heresy erupted across the galaxy, Rogal Dorn had already established a reputation as one of the Imperium's foremost defenders. His journey began when the Emperor discovered him during the Great Crusade, a time when the Imperium sought to unify humanity under a single banner. The Emperor had created the primarchs with this mission in mind, scattering them across the stars, each to grow and develop uniquely under the environments and cultures of distant worlds. Dorn, however, was unlike any of his brothers. His early life on the icy planet of Inwit had forged him into a figure of unparalleled strength and resilience, two qualities that would define his service to the Emperor. Inwit was a world both beautiful and brutal. Its frozen cities, carved from ancient glaciers, were impressive fortresses of stone and ice, symbols of endurance against the unyielding cold. Dorn was raised as part of the Ice Castle's aristocracy, but even his noble birth did not shield him from the rigors of life on Inwit. Here, survival demanded not just physical toughness, but mental discipline. From a young age, Dorn learned to navigate this inhospitable environment where each decision could mean life or death. These early trials imbued him with a sense of responsibility and a commitment to self-reliance. Unlike other primarchs raised in empires or civilizations of power, Dorn's world was one of constant struggle, a trait he would carry into every battle he fought. Under the guidance of his grandfather, Dorn became a skilled strategist and an exceptional leader. His grandfather, the ruler of Inwit, taught him the art of fortification, survival, and command. This education would later become the foundation of Dorn's tactical approach, one based on patience, planning, and steadfast endurance. From commanding his people to managing Inwit's sprawling settlements, Dorn learned the value of sacrifice and loyalty. He came to see his role as a protector of his people, a duty he would later extend to the Imperium as a whole. The ice castles of Inwit were both home and training ground, shaping Dorn's philosophy of duty and honor. When the Emperor finally arrived on Inwit, Dorn was ready to heed the call. Their encounter was nothing short of momentous. The Emperor saw in Dorn the ideal warrior and guardian, a primarch who embodied stability and fortitude. Dorn, in turn, was inspired by the Emperor's vision of a united humanity and agreed to join him without hesitation. He saw the Emperor not only as a ruler, but as a guiding star, a force capable of bringing light to the darkness that threatened mankind. Dorn pledged his service and, with it, the loyalty of the warriors he had led on Inwit. With his newfound purpose, Dorn was given command of the Imperial Fists, a legion of space marines he would mold in his own image. Under Dorn's leadership, the Imperial Fists became a force known for their strict discipline and unwavering loyalty. They were not merely soldiers, but fortifiers, skilled at transforming any environment into a fortress of imperial strength. Through years of campaigns and conquests during the Great Crusade, Dorn and his legion developed a reputation for being the first to hold a newly conquered world and the last to abandon it. Dorn's teachings stressed that pain and hardship were to be met with resilience, that the Emperor's will demanded not only victory, but the preservation of all they conquered. Throughout the Crusade, Dorn's contributions were unparalleled. He brought order to chaos, converting desolate worlds into strongholds that could defend the Imperium's interests. His expertise in siege warfare made him invaluable in taking or defending critical locations, especially those where conventional assaults would have been suicide. His legion built fortifications that stood as unbreakable symbols of imperial rule, each one a testament to Dorn's commitment to the Emperor's vision. His strategic mind saw fortifications not as walls or barricades, but as symbols of protection for humanity, shields that would keep the darkness at bay. Dorn's greatest strength, however, was also his limitation. His rigid approach to warfare sometimes made him less adaptable, a characteristic that set him apart from his more flexible brothers like Horus or Sanguinius. Dorn believed in absolute adherence to his principles, and while this made him a formidable defender, It occasionally hindered his ability to think outside his doctrines. Still, his unyielding dedication proved invaluable in countless campaigns, winning battles that others would have deemed hopeless. The Crusade was also a time when Dorn's relationships with his brothers began to take shape. As the legions expanded their influence across the galaxy, different primarchs came to respect Dorn's skills, while others resented his strict nature. His dedication often led him to work independently, even when collaboration was possible. This independent streak did not go unnoticed by the Emperor, who valued Dorn's strength and saw him as a critical element in the Imperium's future. Over time, Dorn became the Emperor's chosen guardian, the one entrusted with defending Terra itself, a role that would later place him at the heart of the Imperium's most critical defense. In preparing the Imperial Palace, Dorn was tasked with creating fortifications that would make Terra impregnable. This assignment was a profound responsibility, as it was not merely about defending a structure, but protecting the seat of the Emperor's power. Dorn approached this challenge with all the knowledge and discipline he had honed on Inwit and throughout the Crusade. He designed defenses that went beyond walls and barriers, embedding within them layers of traps, bastions, and kill zones intended to slow or halt any invading force. To him, Terra was more than a planet. It was a sanctuary for humanity's future, a symbol of hope that had to be safeguarded at all costs. This task consumed Dorn, both physically and mentally. He labored over every detail, inspecting fortifications personally, directing his legion with a level of precision that only he could maintain. His planning reached an intensity bordering on obsession, as he recognized that Terra's defenses could be the last line against any threat to the Emperor's life. His legion worked tirelessly, not only constructing physical walls, but embodying the very spirit of defense. Each soldier was prepared to become a living part of the fortifications, ready to hold their ground against any force that dared to breach the Emperor's domain. As the Crusade continued, Dorn's life became defined by this dual mission, expanding the Imperium through conquest and fortifying its heart on Terra. His contributions to both endeavors made him indispensable, a figure of awe and respect within the ranks of the Imperium. But even as Dorn and his legion prepared for the next battle, a shadow loomed on the horizon. The loyalty and resolve he had instilled in his warriors would soon face a test unlike any they had ever known. The galaxy they had fought so hard to protect was on the brink of a cataclysm, and Dorn, as always, stood ready to defend it, no matter the cost. As the Great Crusade raged on, the Imperium of Man grew ever larger, stretching across countless worlds and systems. But even as the Emperor's vision of a united galaxy seemed within reach, whispers of rebellion began to fester. Unknown to many, cracks were forming within the ranks of the primarchs and their legions. Loyalty, once unshakable, was now tainted by ambition, jealousy, and the insidious corruption of the warp. Rogal Dorn, ever vigilant, was among the first to perceive the importance of this quiet discord, though even he could not foresee the disaster that awaited them all. This creeping unrest reached a critical point when Horus, the War Master and one of the Emperor's most trusted sons, began to fall under the influence of the dark gods of chaos. His transformation was not immediate, but instead a gradual descent fueled by doubt and resentment. Horus had been burdened with the role of War Master, and over time he began to see this not as an honor, but as a test of his loyalty, one that slowly poisoned his perspective. Eventually, his pride and ambition made him vulnerable to the promises of chaos. As Horus shifted his loyalty away from the Emperor, he began recruiting others to his cause, drawing a number of primarchs and their legions into his web of corruption. Meanwhile, Rogal Dorn continued his work on Terra, overseeing the fortifications and defenses of the Imperial Palace. Dorn remained largely unaware of Horus's gradual corruption, as his focus was wholly on strengthening the Emperor's seat of power. However, as reports of suspicious activities and rebellious acts among the legions reached Terra, Dorn's awareness sharpened. The rumors seemed incomprehensible, given the brotherhood that had once unified the primarchs, but Dorn could not ignore them. He began investigating quietly, questioning and scrutinizing the actions of those around him. It was not long before the full scale of Horus's treachery became undeniable. The Istvan III atrocity, the first open act of rebellion in which Horus ordered the massacre of loyalists within his own ranks, signaled the beginning of the Horus heresy. This single event was a shock to Dorn, and it shattered the thin veneer of peace that had covered the Imperium. At last, the true enemy was revealed, and Dorn's heart was torn between disbelief and determination. The brotherhood he had trusted had turned on itself, and the Imperium, the entity he had sworn to protect, was now its own worst enemy. The heresy spread quickly, with entire legions either joining Horus or resisting his betrayal. The Imperium was thrust into a devastating civil war that would tear it apart from within. Dorn, upon realizing the scope of Horus's plans, devoted himself entirely to the Emperor's defense. His preparations on Terra took on a renewed urgency, as he understood that Horus would eventually bring his war to the Imperial Palace itself. Dorn's singular focus became the preservation of Terra, even as other primarchs and loyalist legions fought desperate battles across the galaxy to stem the tide of the traitors. Dorn coordinated with his remaining loyalist brothers, notably Robut Guilliman and Lion L. Johnson, to resist Horus's forces on multiple fronts. Together, they formed defensive strategies, creating strongholds and rallying points across the Imperium to slow the traitor legion's advance. Yet, even with these coordinated efforts, the Loyalists were often outnumbered and outmatched by the might of the traitors and the dark forces that now fueled them. Horus, empowered by the deities of chaos, was no longer simply a primarch. He had become an avatar of wrath and darkness, and his forces seemed unstoppable. As the heresy continued, each world lost to Horus's forces was a painful reminder of the Imperium's fragility. Dorn saw planets, systems, and even entire sectors falling under the banner of chaos. The suffering and betrayal weighed heavily on him, but he did not allow his focus to waver. To him, the Emperor's vision of a united humanity was still worth fighting for, and as long as he drew breath, he would not let it fall. The defenses of Terra became his obsession, his way of channeling his frustration and fury into something constructive. Dorn understood that the final confrontation would likely occur on the very doorstep of the Emperor's throne, and he prepared accordingly. As the conflict grew, Dorn's resolve was tested in unprecedented ways. He had to confront the horrifying reality that some of his once beloved brothers were now his enemies. Primarchs he had once respected, like Fulgrim and Mortarion, now fought under Horus's banner, their souls corrupted by the dark gods of chaos. Each new betrayal was a painful blow, yet it also steeled Dorn's resolve. He saw himself as the Emperor's last line of defense, the shield that would hold against any force that dared to defile Terra. For Dorn, the war had become deeply personal. He was not just defending the Emperor's throne, but the very soul of the Imperium itself. As the traitor legions advanced, the Loyalist forces began their retreat toward Terra. The final stages of the heresy were set in motion as Dorn ordered all Loyalist forces within reach to converge on the Imperial Palace. He understood that Terra would be the site of the last and greatest battle, one that would determine the fate of humanity. Every step of his preparations was made with grim precision, for Dorn was under no illusions about what was to come. He knew that Horus would throw the full weight of his forces against the Emperor's bastion, and Dorn was determined to make it the bloodiest confrontation in the galaxy's history. While Dorn prepared Terra, other Loyalist legions struggled to regroup and reinforce the defenses. The traitor legions pursued them ruthlessly, crushing any pockets of resistance that attempted to stand against them. For the Loyalist forces, the retreat to Terra was a desperate race against time, a journey fraught with hardship and sacrifice. Many would not survive to see the final battle, falling to the relentless assaults of the traitors. Yet those who did make it to Terra were driven by an unbreakable resolve, ready to fight and die for the Emperor's dream. As the traitors closed in, Dorn continued his grim work, tirelessly overseeing the construction of walls, trenches, and fortifications around the imperial palace. The defenses were designed to slow and weaken the enemy, to give loyalist forces every possible advantage in the coming siege. Dorn was unrelenting in his demands, and his own soldiers suffered grueling labor to meet his standards. There could be no weakness in the defenses, no oversight that might allow the traitors' entry. Dorn's obsession with perfection reflected his belief that failure was not an option. He was defending the Emperor, the heart of the Imperium, and he would sacrifice everything to ensure victory. The stage was set. As Horus's forces drew closer, the skies of Terra darkened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the anticipation of impending war. Dorn knew that once Horus arrived, there would be no turning back. The Imperial Palace was ready, the Loyalist forces prepared, and Rogal Dorn stood at the heart of it all, unwavering in his commitment to the Emperor. The final battle for humanity was about to begin, and Dorn, ever vigilant, was ready to face the wrath of his fallen brothers and the horrors of chaos itself. The galaxy descended into chaos as Horus and his traitorous forces drew nearer to Terra. The massive fleet that carried the traitor legions darkened the stars above, an ominous herald of the devastation they intended to unleash upon the heart of the Imperium. On the ground, the Imperial Palace stood as a fortress without equal, its defenses designed to withstand the worst horrors of war. The defenders of Terra, consisting of loyalist space marines, Imperial army soldiers, and the Emperor's custodies, prepared themselves for the battle to come. Every warrior understood the stakes. The survival of humanity itself hung in the balance, and failure was unthinkable. At the heart of these defenses, Rogal Dorn stood as a sentinel, directing his forces with unyielding resolve. His orders were precise, his demeanor unshakable, and his vision for Terra's defense uncompromising. Dorn had anticipated every conceivable assault, and the defenders were positioned with meticulous care. Around him, the Imperial fists prepared to embody his steadfastness, their hearts hardened by the knowledge that this would be their final stand. Every trench, every barricade, every fortification carried the weight of Dorn's meticulous planning, as if each stone had been laid by his own hand. The first assault began with the roar of artillery, as Horus unleashed a devastating bombardment upon the planet's surface. The earth shook under the weight of the traitor's wrath, and clouds of dust and debris blotted out the sky. For hours, the palace grounds endured a relentless storm of fire and fury, a seemingly endless rain of destruction meant to shatter the defenders' morale. Yet, within the fortified walls, Dorn's forces held firm. Trained to withstand both mental and physical assault, the defenders did not falter. Dorn's meticulous preparations, reinforced by layers of fortifications and hidden defensive positions, turned each strike into a futile display of brute force. The traitors were forced to commit ground troops, abandoning their hopes of breaking through with artillery alone. As the dust settled, the traitors launched their ground assault. Waves of Chaos Space Marines surged forward, accompanied by demonic monstrosities, corrupted war machines, and traitor guardsmen twisted by the warp. The air was filled with the clash of weapons and the cries of war as the forces of chaos threw themselves against the palace defenses. Each charge was met with a storm of disciplined fire from the Imperial fists and their allies, who struck with precision and unflinching resolve. Dorn's forces made every inch of ground a bloody contest, refusing to yield. The traitor legions attempted to breach the palace walls using all manner of unholy methods. They deployed monstrous siege engines, conjured hellish storms of psychic energy, and sent forth mutated creatures born from the darkest reaches of the warp. Despite their relentless onslaught, the defenders repelled wave after wave, holding the traitors at bay. Dorn's defenses proved to be as formidable as the primarch himself, and Horus's forces found themselves ensnared in a brutal war of attrition. For each soldier of chaos who advanced, dozens fell to the entrenched defenders, who fought with the knowledge that their lives were the only barrier between Horus and the Emperor. However, the relentless attacks took a toll. As hours turned into days, exhaustion crept into the ranks of the defenders. Supplies dwindled, ammunition ran low, and casualties mounted. For every traitor slain, another seemed to take their place, and the forces of chaos seemed inexhaustible. Yet Dorn's presence was a source of strength for the defenders. Even as losses mounted, his voice cut through the din of battle, issuing orders and encouragement to his warriors. He moved from position to position, ensuring that the defenses held firm. Dorn fought alongside his legion, each kill a testament to his skill and determination, and his unshakable resolve inspired those around him to press on, no matter the cost. The skies above Terra became a theater of violence as the Loyalist and traitor fleets clashed in brutal aerial combat. Ships exploded in brilliant displays of fire and destruction, their wreckage littering the space above the planet like a grim reminder of the war's enormity. Despite the best efforts of the Loyalist fleet, the sheer power of the traitor forces began to push them back. Dropships bearing Chaos forces broke through the atmosphere, deploying fresh waves of traitor marines and demons onto the palace grounds. Each new arrival only added to the pressure on Dorn's forces, who found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. As the battle raged on, several of Dorn's fellow primarchs arrived to reinforce Terra's defenses. Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, with his angelic appearance and unmatched ferocity, became a beacon of hope for the defenders, inspiring them to fight with renewed vigor. The combined strength of Dorn's fortifications and Sanguinius's leadership added a critical layer of resistance against the invaders. Other Loyalist forces, from the Imperial Army to battle-hardened Space Marine legions, joined the fray, each contributing their unique skills and strength to Terra's defense. Yet even with this support, the traitors continued to press forward, driven by a hatred as boundless as the warp itself. On the ground, the war devolved into brutal, close-quarters combat. Hallways, courtyards, and defensive bastions became scenes of savage hand-to-hand fighting. Every corridor and chamber of the palace was contested, with Loyalists and traitors locked in deadly struggles for control. The defenders were outnumbered and beset by monstrosities from the warp, yet they held their ground with an almost superhuman determination. Dorn's training and discipline showed in every warrior who fought under his command. They fought not merely with strength, but with a resilience that turned each defensive position into a fortress. The cost of the battle was staggering. Blood soaked the palace floors, and bodies piled high as both sides fought with an intensity born from desperation. Demonic creatures prowled the palace grounds, their otherworldly shrieks filling the air as they hunted down defenders. These abominations from the warp were unlike any enemy the defenders had faced before, and they inflicted horrific casualties, tearing through ranks with claws, fangs, and sorcerous power. But even against these twisted horrors, the defenders stood firm. Dorn had anticipated such threats, and his strategies accounted for the unnatural abilities of chaos. The defenders used holy icons, psychic defenses, and precise counterattacks to weaken the demons' grip on reality, banishing them back to the warp when possible. As the battle pressed on, the sense of impending doom grew heavier. The traitors' forces encircled the palace, cutting off avenues of retreat and reinforcements. Dorn's defenses, though formidable, could not be expected to hold indefinitely against such relentless pressure. The defenders were pushed to their breaking points, forced to rely on dwindling reserves and sheer willpower. Even Dorn himself showed signs of strain, though his spirit remained unbroken. The primarch knew that his greatest challenge was yet to come. Horus would not be satisfied with merely testing Terra's defenses. The War Master would strike at the Emperor directly, and Dorn had to ensure the palace held until that final moment arrived. As the siege wore on, the tension among the defenders grew. Every soldier, every space marine, every loyalist on Terra understood the gravity of their task. They were all that stood between the Emperor and oblivion, and failure meant the end of everything they held dear. In their minds, the possibility of defeat was unthinkable, yet the reality of their situation grew increasingly dire. Dorn's voice, unwavering and strong, remained a constant presence over the Vox channels, urging his warriors to remember their purpose and to hold the line. His words became a lifeline to the defenders, a reminder that as long as they held their ground, humanity still had a chance. The brutal onslaught continued, with both sides suffering unspeakable losses. Yet, as wave after wave of traitor forces crashed against the palace walls, the defenders' resolve hardened. They had become more than soldiers. They were the last guardians of the Emperor's vision, a force bound by duty, sacrifice, and unyielding loyalty. With each passing hour, they knew that their lives might be the final shield protecting the Emperor from Horus's wrath. As the defenders braced for the next wave of the assault, the knowledge that the ultimate battle was yet to come weighed upon them all. In the thick of the siege, with both loyalists and traitors locked in an unending struggle, the fate of the Imperium hung by a thread. Despite the unrelenting onslaught, Rogal Dorn's defenses around the Imperial Palace held. His strategies had bought time, and his soldiers continued to stand firm, embodying the tenacity he demanded of them. Yet, with each passing hour, the weight of the conflict grew heavier, and the devastation surrounding Terra deepened. As the battle raged on, word spread among the defenders that Horus himself had entered the battlefield, bringing with him a dark and terrible presence that seemed to distort reality. The War Master, once the greatest of the Emperor's sons, was now something altogether different, a figure transformed by chaos, his strength bolstered by powers beyond mortal understanding. The traitor forces surged forward with renewed fury, empowered by Horus's presence. Dark energies crackled around him, and the mere sight of him on the battlefield filled the loyalist defenders with both dread and determination. They knew that this war could end only with Horus's defeat, and with each step he took closer to the palace. They prepared themselves for a final, decisive confrontation. As Horus advanced, the defenders' lines began to falter, stretched thin by the relentless pressure. Dorn, sensing the shift in momentum, concentrated his forces at critical points, reinforcing the palace's inner sanctums and drawing his lines tighter. The last layers of defense were fortified to withstand the unholy strength of Horus's forces, and the Imperial fists fought with renewed vigor, knowing they stood at the heart of the Emperor's sanctuary. Dorn's orders remained steady and clear, guiding his warriors to hold each position as long as possible, no matter the personal cost. Every corridor, every hall, every defensive choke point became a fierce battleground, with Dorn's forces fighting to the last man to buy time. The desperation and intensity of the battle began to take a physical and mental toll on everyone involved. Reports of warriors falling to exhaustion or succumbing to injuries became common, yet none abandoned their posts. The defenders were buoyed by their shared purpose, and Dorn's words remained a guiding force. His presence, though not always visible, was felt throughout the palace. Even at his most pressured, Dorn maintained an unwavering calm, his focus fixed on protecting the Emperor. He knew that, despite his best efforts, the traitors would eventually breach the final defenses, and his mind raced through every possibility, every potential move, to prepare for that moment. Meanwhile, the arrival of demonic forces only intensified the conflict's brutality. These entities, monstrous and twisted beyond the comprehension of mortals, brought chaos and terror wherever they appeared. Creatures from the warp ripped through loyalist lines, their unholy forms immune to fear and unyielding in their assault. But the defenders, bolstered by their faith in the Emperor and the leadership of Dorn, fought back with a resilience that astounded even the most battle-hardened among them. Psychic barriers, holy wards, and the sheer physical might of space marines and custodes slowed the demons' advance, though the cost in lives was staggering. During this chaos, Dorn's tactical mind remained as sharp as ever. He adapted his strategies to counter the increasing numbers of demons and traitors, adjusting his forces to defend Terra's last defenses with cold precision. Dorn coordinated with Sanguinius, the angelic primarch, whose fury on the battlefield inspired even the most demoralized warriors. Together, they orchestrated a defense that was as much psychological as it was physical, using the presence of legends like Dorn and Sanguinius to rally the defenders against the monstrous tide. As hours bled into days, both sides endured unimaginable losses. The palace grounds became littered with the fallen, and the walls themselves bore the scars of endless battle. For Dorn, every loss was a personal blow, yet he showed no sign of weakness. His heart ached for his soldiers, for the lives sacrificed in defense of the Emperor, but he could not afford to falter. He knew that in war, especially one of this scale, every life lost was a calculated risk, a sacrifice for the greater goal. Dorn's pragmatism allowed him to keep pushing his forces beyond their limits, driving them to withstand the horrors unleashed upon them. But the unending battle weighed heavily on all, and rumors spread among the defenders of Horus's seeming invincibility. Whispers of despair threatened to weaken morale, and Dorn knew he had to act. He spoke to his soldiers over the Vox, reminding them of the purpose for which they fought. His words were not of comfort, for Dorn had always been blunt and unsparing in his views, but his conviction was clear. He spoke of loyalty, duty, and the unbreakable resolve of humanity when united under the Emperor. His speech, full of uncompromising truth, rekindled the spark of determination within the defenders. They held firm once again, driven by the knowledge that they were the last bastion against the forces of darkness. As the traitors pressed ever closer, Dorn personally took to the battlefield, joining his warriors in direct combat. His presence on the front lines sent a surge of strength through the defenders, who fought with renewed vigor beside their primarch. Dorn's mastery in combat was evident, his blows powerful and precise, each swing of his weapon a testament to his skill and ferocity. He became a symbol of defiance, standing as an immovable barrier against the tide of traitors. Those who fought alongside him felt as if the very spirit of Terra itself fought with them, a force of nature that would not yield to any power. Throughout this brutal conflict, Dorn never once allowed despair to take root in his heart. He fought with a clarity of purpose that kept him focused, and his mind remained several steps ahead, preparing for each wave of attack with calculated precision. Every decision, every maneuver was made with one goal in mind: to protect the Emperor. Even as he wielded his weapon, striking down enemies with ruthless efficiency, Dorn's thoughts were on the next strategic move, the next layer of defense. His mind worked tirelessly, a fortress unto itself, unyielding even as the world around him descended into ruin. And yet, in the quiet moments between battles, a sense of finality began to settle over the defenders. They knew that this battle could very well be their last. Dorn, too, understood this grim reality, but he kept his thoughts focused on the present, refusing to entertain the possibility of defeat. His resolve, tempered by years of warfare, was unbreakable, and he channeled that strength into his warriors. Each defender fought with the knowledge that their efforts could make the difference, that their sacrifices might be what bought the Emperor the time he needed. As the defenders braced themselves for another surge of traitors, Dorn prepared for the ultimate test. He knew that soon Horus himself would make his move, and that the final confrontation was near. The palace, though battered and scarred, stood as a testament to Dorn's indomitable spirit. It was his greatest work, a fortress of unyielding resilience and a monument to humanity's strength. Dorn had prepared Terra as best he could, and now, as the darkest hour approached, he was ready to stand firm against whatever horrors Horus would bring. Every defender, every warrior on Terra now stood on the edge of history. They had fought with courage beyond measure, and each one understood that their lives were part of a greater purpose. As the skies darkened and the traitor forces gathered for the final assault, Rogal Dorn stood as the ultimate sentinel, unwavering, prepared to face down his corrupted brothers, the demons, and even death itself if it meant defending the Emperor and the dream of a united humanity. The stage was set, the battle awaited, and Dorn, like Terra itself, would not break. The defenders of Terra prepared themselves as Horus's forces gathered for the climactic assault, their shadows looming across the broken land like an endless tide of darkness. Within the walls of the imperial palace, an eerie silence had settled, broken only by the occasional murmurs of soldiers whispering prayers to the emperor. Every soldier, every warrior knew that what lay ahead would be the greatest test of their lives. The air was thick with tension and the unshakable sense that the fate of the Imperium would be decided in the coming hours. Rogal Dorn, standing amidst the rubble-strewn hallways, continued his relentless preparations, his every action a testament to his indomitable will. Around him, squads of Imperial fists and loyalist space marines reinforced positions, adjusted artillery placements, and checked every last weapon for readiness. Dorn's gaze was as unyielding as his armor, and his silence spoke volumes to his warriors. His presence, calm yet commanding, reminded them that they were fighting for something far greater than themselves. Dorn's composure under the immense pressure served as a final anchor, a reminder that even as the galaxy threatened to collapse into chaos, there were still those who stood unwavering. At that moment, Dorn's mind was entirely absorbed in strategy, each layer of defense reviewed and recalibrated in preparation for the unpredictable horrors that the traitors would bring. While his tactics were ruthless and his demands relentless, his care for his soldiers was unmistakable. Every fortification he constructed, every line he reinforced, was crafted not only to prolong the defense, but to give each soldier the best possible chance at survival. Dorn's attention to detail, his relentless dedication, resonated deeply with his warriors, who saw in him the very embodiment of duty. As the first tremors of the traitors' final assault reached the palace grounds, Dorn's calm broke only for a moment. A glint of steely resolve flashed in his eyes as he signaled his forces to prepare. Across the palace, the defenders took their positions, readying themselves for the terrible storm they knew was coming. Then, in an explosion of fire and fury, the traitors surged forward, a tide of chaos that spread across the palace grounds like a flood. Twisted war machines lumbered through the rubble, demons poured forth from the warp, and the traitor marines unleashed a barrage of fire that shattered stone and steel alike. The palace shook as the enemy advanced, and Dorn's forces met them with an unyielding wall of fire and steel. Every inch of ground was contested, every doorway and barricade transformed into a deadly choke point. As the battle intensified, the sounds of gunfire and the clash of blades melded into a cacophony that echoed through the shattered halls of the palace. Dorn's defenders fought with the strength of those who understood that retreat was no longer an option, that here at the Emperor's seat of power, they would either emerge victorious or die holding the line. Horus's forces threw everything they had into the assault, using warp-fueled weapons, sorcerous spells, and waves of twisted mutants to break through the defenders' lines. The demons, grotesque and ravenous, were immune to fear and seemed inexhaustible, tearing through loyalist forces with abandon. But even against these monstrosities, Dorn's forces held fast. The defenders fought with a precision and unity that astonished even the most battle-hardened among them, their actions guided by Dorn's unwavering leadership. He moved from one defensive point to another, issuing orders and reinforcing positions, his voice cutting through the chaos like a beacon. Hours passed, each one marked by devastating losses on both sides. The palace, once a symbol of imperial grandeur, was now a shattered fortress. Its golden halls were painted with the blood of both loyalists and traitors, and the air grew thick with the smoke of burning debris. Yet even as the situation grew more dire, Dorn's resolve did not waver. He knew that the palace defenses were reaching their limits, and he steeled himself for the brutal confrontations to come. His thoughts were unclouded, his mind focused solely on his duty to protect the Emperor, no matter the cost. Amidst the unending waves of enemies, a new threat emerged. The Chaos Titans, towering machines of destruction, fueled by both ancient technology and dark sorcery. These titanic constructs were armed with weapons capable of obliterating entire battalions in seconds. Their massive footsteps shook the earth as they advanced, each step accompanied by the deep, unnatural rumble of machinery warped by the touch of chaos. Their arrival signaled a new level of devastation, one that would test the limits of Dorn's defenses and the courage of his warriors. Dorn quickly adapted, rallying his heavy weapon squads to focus on these towering threats. Artillery fire and plasma blasts filled the air, aimed at the Chaos Titans in an attempt to slow their advance. The defenders fought with desperation, every shot fired with precision, each strike calculated to inflict maximum damage. Yet, the Titans were resilient, their armored hulls deflecting or absorbing most of the attacks. With each step, they brought ruin closer to the heart of the palace, and the Loyalist forces struggled to maintain their foothold against the massive war machines. As the Titans continued their assault, Dorn made a critical decision. He ordered his remaining reserves, those who had been held back for just such an emergency, to engage the Titans directly. This elite force, composed of Imperial Fists veterans and the most skilled warriors among the defenders, launched a daring attack on the Titans, using jump packs and advanced weapons to close the distance and strike at the towering machines. The ensuing battle was nothing short of apocalyptic, as the Titans swatted at the attackers like insects, but the Loyalists fought with a ferocity that belied their small numbers. They managed to cripple one of the Chaos Titans, its massive form collapsing with a thunderous crash that shook the entire palace. Yet the destruction of one Titan did little to stem the tide, as more Chaos forces filled the breach, seeking to press their advantage. Dorn's forces were pushed back, forced to concede ground inch by inch, retreating deeper into the palace's heart. The corridors and halls that had once been places of ceremony and reverence were now battlegrounds, each one fiercely contested by Loyalists and traitors alike. The defenders, though battered and exhausted, continued to fight with a tenacity that astonished even Dorn himself. In the darkest moments of the assault, Dorn's focus remained unbroken. He issued commands, rallied his troops, and, where necessary, joined them in combat. The primarch fought with unmatched fury, his blows powerful enough to shatter armor and send traitors sprawling. His resolve inspired those around him, imbuing them with the strength to continue, even when all seemed lost. Dorn's leadership was not one of empty words. It was a leadership forged in battle, earned through the sacrifices he was willing to make alongside his warriors. As the last remnants of Dorn's defenses were pushed to their breaking points, he made his final preparations. He knew that Horus was close, that the War Master would soon make his move to confront the Emperor directly. Dorn's thoughts turned inward, to the immense burden he carried, to the duty that had driven him his entire life. He was ready to give everything, to hold the line until his final breath, if that was what it took. With a sense of calm determination, he positioned himself at the palace's innermost sanctum, ready to stand as the Emperor's last sentinel. The final hours of the siege saw an intensity that surpassed anything the defenders had experienced. Both sides fought with desperation, each driven by their own belief, by the knowledge that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Dorn's forces, though vastly outnumbered, continued to hold, their defenses layered and their spirits hardened. They had become living embodiments of Dorn's will, fighting not just for themselves, but for the Emperor, for humanity, and for the dream of an imperium free from the horrors of chaos. As the defenders braced for yet another wave of attackers, the battle reached a fever pitch, a chaotic symphony of destruction that reverberated through the palace walls. The time had come, the final showdown was near, and Dorn, the unbreakable protector of Terra, awaited the arrival of his fallen brother, knowing that this confrontation would decide the fate of all. As the siege of Terra reached its climax, the Imperial Palace became a battleground drenched in blood and shadows, where every hall and chamber echoed with the clash of weapons and the roars of brutal combat. The air was thick with the stench of war, and the defenders, exhausted yet unwavering, continued to fight with everything they had left. Rogal Dorn's leadership and the unbreakable spirit he instilled in his forces were the only things holding the line, their last defense against the tides of chaos that sought to drown the heart of the Imperium. In the midst of this maelstrom, Dorn received the order he had dreaded but knew would eventually come. The Emperor himself had summoned Dorn to his side. The Emperor's will was clear. Dorn was to remain at the inner sanctum to guard the final stronghold within the palace. Though he longed to face Horus directly, Dorn understood his duty. His role was not to seek vengeance or personal glory, but to ensure that the Emperor was protected to the very last moment. Reluctantly, he turned his focus inward, drawing his forces back to form a last, unbreakable ring of defense around the Emperor's throne room. Here, Dorn would make his final stand, alongside the Emperor's most trusted warriors. Inside the palace's depths, Dorn's forces braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation. Every loyalist knew what was at stake and was prepared to fight to the death. The Emperor's custodies, clad in golden armor that gleamed even in the dim, smoke-filled corridors, stood ready, their spears and shields forming a wall of defiance. Dorn positioned the remaining Imperial fists and loyalist warriors with precision, turning every corridor, every antechamber, into a lethal trap. He calculated every line of sight, every fallback position, so that even the smallest space could become a bastion of resistance. Each defender understood that there was no retreat, only victory or death. The silence that fell over the palace's inner sanctum was chilling. Outside, the sounds of the battle still raged, a distant storm of violence that grew closer with each passing second. Dorn stood among his warriors, his face a mask of grim determination. He knew that this would be the ultimate test, the final defense of the Emperor's will. The primarch's gaze swept over his soldiers, and in his eyes, they saw not just their commander, but the spirit of unyielding strength that had driven them through countless battles. Together, they prepared to face the unimaginable. Then, with a thunderous roar, the traitors breached the sanctum's outer defenses. They poured in like a flood, a torrent of corrupted warriors and demons, each one a twisted reflection of what they had once been. Dorn's forces met them head-on, unleashing a storm of bolter fire and plasma that lit up the darkened corridors. The defenders fought with a unity and precision that defied their exhausted state, each movement guided by the discipline Dorn had drilled into them. Every blow was measured, every shot counted. The defenders made the traitors pay for every inch of ground with blood, yet the enemy was relentless. Driven by the dark energies of the warp and the promise of ultimate dominion, the traitor marines and their demonic allies pressed forward, their ranks seemingly endless. The demons twisted through the air, claws and fangs tearing into the defenders, their unholy forms almost impossible to destroy. Loyalist soldiers fell one after another, their lives snuffed out in a whirlwind of violence. The cost of each victory, of each successful repulsion, was higher than the last, yet the defenders held on, refusing to break under the pressure. As the traitors closed in, Dorn himself entered the fray, his power armor gleaming even in the dimness of the palace's ruined corridors. With each swing of his weapon, he struck down traitors with lethal efficiency, his presence a rallying point for the defenders. Beside him fought the custodies, their loyalty as fierce and unbreakable as Dorn's own, their every strike filled with the fury of those who protect the Emperor himself. In the face of overwhelming odds, they stood shoulder to shoulder, a wall of golden armor and determination, refusing to allow the enemy even a single step closer to the Emperor. The battle's intensity only grew as more traitors forced their way into the sanctum. The defenders, fighting without rest, began to falter under the endless waves of enemies. Dorn's strategic mind worked tirelessly, calculating each defense, but he knew their strength was nearing its limit. Despite their unity, despite their fierce loyalty, the numbers were against them. Dorn's warriors were surrounded, pressed on all sides, yet they fought on, embodying the very principles their primarch had instilled in them. For them, the choice was simple. They would die for the Emperor or die fighting to protect him. The toll on the defenders was staggering. Bodies littered the halls, golden and blood-stained, each a testament to the loyalty and sacrifice of those who had given their lives for the Emperor. Dorn's forces, though fewer in number, fought with a desperate strength that seemed to defy logic, as if their devotion to their cause had transformed them into something more than mortal. For every fallen traitor, another took its place, and the defenders knew that their lives were measured in moments, yet their conviction did not falter. They fought on, defying the inevitable, their spirits unbreakable even as their bodies gave out. In the final moments of the siege, the corridors of the palace became a scene of brutal close-quarters combat. The defenders wielded their weapons with deadly precision, each swing, each shot a last stand against the darkness. Dorn himself became a force of destruction, his every movement a calculated strike against the invaders. He fought as he had trained his legion to fight, with discipline and precision, his strikes lethal and unerring. But even he could see that the battle was nearing its end. The traitors, driven by their twisted purpose, would not stop until they had reached the Emperor. As Dorn continued to fight, his mind reached a state of acceptance. He knew that no matter how many enemies they struck down, the tide was inexorable. Each fallen defender represented a crack in their line, and Dorn could see the walls closing in. He steeled himself, his only thought on the Emperor, who stood just beyond the final doors, locked in a battle that would decide the fate of all humanity. Dorn's final command to his warriors was clear. They would hold the line until the last breath, until they could fight no more. Their loyalty, their strength, would be their last gift to the Emperor. Then, with a surge that seemed to resonate through the palace itself, the traitors broke through the last of the inner defenses. The sanctum doors were within sight, and the traitors, spurred by their proximity to the Emperor, fought with a renewed frenzy. Dorn and his remaining warriors were outnumbered, surrounded, yet they stood firm. Each soldier, each space marine knew they were fighting for the Emperor's survival. The defenders tightened their formation, their every move synchronized, their final stand a symbol of pure, unbreakable resolve. In those final harrowing moments, Rogal Dorn stood like a statue of defiance, his weapon cleaving through the ranks of traitors. His face, unyielding and fierce, was the last image many traitors saw before their end. Dorn's presence filled his warriors with the strength to endure, to fight even as darkness closed in around them. For them, he was not just a leader, but a beacon of unshakable purpose, a living embodiment of duty and loyalty. Each strike he delivered was a reminder that Terra itself would not bow. The battle reached its zenith, with the defenders' last breaths given in defense of the Emperor. They had fought to the very last, their sacrifices echoing through the shattered halls of the imperial palace. Rogal Dorn, bloodied but unbroken, stood amidst the aftermath, his gaze fixed forward, his duty fulfilled to the end. As the echoes of battle faded, he knew that their fight had not been in vain. The Emperor's vision endured, forged in the blood and strength of those who had stood against the darkness. In the end, the defenders of Terra had stood their ground, and their sacrifice would forever remain a testament to the resilience and loyalty of humanity. As the final echoes of battle faded from the halls of the imperial palace, Rogal Dorn stood among the remnants of his warriors, a silent monument to their resilience and sacrifice. Around him lay the fallen, his loyal soldiers, the golden-armored custodes, and his own imperial fists, each one a testament to the battle that had shaped the future of humanity. The cost had been unfathomable, but Dorn knew that their sacrifice had held the line, preserving the Emperor's vision for mankind. Yet his relief was tempered with a profound sorrow, a grief that would stay with him, for though they had protected Terra, the galaxy itself had forever changed. Dorn's heart was heavy as he surveyed the broken palace. The halls that once symbolized the Imperium's grandeur were now scarred, ravaged by the fury of war. Each mark, each shattered pillar, was a reminder of the brutal siege, a reminder of the blood spilled to preserve this bastion of hope. The reality of their victory was stark. It was not the glorious triumph he had once envisioned. Instead, it felt hollow, a Pyrrhic victory that had left the Imperium weakened, its strength nearly exhausted. Dorn knew that they had not won through superior strength or skill, but through sheer will and an unbreakable dedication to the Emperor's dream. In the days that followed, Dorn worked tirelessly to bring order to the shattered remains of Terra. The Imperium lay in ruins, and the galaxy was filled with remnants of Horus's rebellion, dark forces that continued to threaten humanity's survival. Dorn understood that there would be no peace, no time to mourn or rebuild. His grief and exhaustion became fuel, driving him to repair what was left of the Imperium. He organized search and rescue teams, salvaging what they could from the ruins, aiding the wounded, and restoring what little infrastructure had survived. He was a commander not only in war, but in rebuilding, his hands turning from destruction to preservation. Even in these early efforts, Dorn could see the cracks forming within the Imperium. The unity they had fought so hard to preserve now seemed fragile, fractured by the sheer devastation of the heresy. The betrayal of Horus and the other traitor primarchs had left deep wounds, both within the Imperium structure and in the minds of its people. There was a sense of paranoia, a lingering mistrust that crept into every aspect of the Imperium's governance. Loyal citizens, once steadfast in their belief in the Emperor's vision, now looked upon each other with suspicion, wary of hidden allegiances or unseen corruption. In the heart of the Imperial Palace, Dorn and the remaining loyalist primarchs gathered to determine the future course of the Imperium. This council, tense and somber, was haunted by the absence of those who had fallen or turned traitor. Among them was Robut Guilliman, who spoke fervently of reformation, of restructuring the Imperium to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. Guilliman's vision was bold and pragmatic, but it clashed with Dorn's own principles. Dorn, ever the stoic guardian, felt that the Imperium's strength lay in its unbreakable loyalty, not in bureaucracy or reform. However, he recognized the necessity of Guilliman's proposal, even as it pained him to admit that the Imperium was no longer the beacon of unity it once was. This gathering would give rise to the Codex Astartes, a doctrine that would divide the Space Marine legions into smaller, more controllable chapters, reducing the power any one individual or force could wield. Dorn initially opposed this plan, viewing it as a rejection of the unity and strength they had forged in battle. To him, the legions were a testament to the Emperor's vision, the ultimate protectors of humanity. Yet, understanding the gravity of Guilliman's arguments, Dorn eventually relented, allowing the Imperial fists to be divided and restructured. This was a bitter compromise for him, a concession that went against his every instinct, but he chose to make it for the sake of stability. He knew that his personal beliefs could no longer outweigh the needs of a fractured Imperium. Dorn's loyalty to the Emperor drove him to embrace these changes, but it also isolated him. His once steadfast optimism had been eroded by the heresy, leaving him haunted by the memories of betrayal and loss. He became withdrawn, burdened by the weight of survival rather than triumph. His interactions with the other primarchs grew distant as he threw himself fully into the task of fortifying what was left of the Imperium. Each fortress, each bastion he built, became a testament to his commitment as he strove to protect the Imperium from further threats, even as the galaxy's shadows continued to close in around them. Yet Dorn's work was far from over. Reports of Chaos forces regrouping in the far reaches of space reached Terra, each whisper a reminder that Horus's defeat had not eradicated the forces of corruption. With a renewed resolve, Dorn led his warriors on campaigns across the stars, waging a relentless war against Chaos and its remnants. He carried the memory of the fallen with him, each battle fought in their honor. For Dorn, these campaigns were more than just military maneuvers. They were acts of remembrance, a promise that the sacrifices made on Terra would not be in vain. He was driven by a need to honor those who had given their lives, to ensure that their legacy would be preserved. Dorn's last campaign would take him deep into the void, where he would face an enemy fleet that threatened the very heart of the Imperium. This final battle was fierce, a brutal confrontation that pushed Dorn and his warriors to their limits. In the heat of battle, Dorn fought with the same strength and resolve that had defined him during the heresy, his every action a reflection of his unyielding loyalty. But as the battle raged on, Dorn's fate became a mystery. The last transmissions from his ship spoke of defiance and valor, of a primarch who would not yield even in his final moments. In the aftermath, the Imperial fists searched tirelessly for their primarch, hoping against hope that Dorn had somehow survived. Yet no trace of him remained, and his warriors mourned their loss deeply. To the Imperium, Dorn's disappearance was a profound blow, a symbol of the tragic cost of loyalty and duty. The memory of Rogal Dorn, however, lived on in every fortress, every bastion, every wall that he had built to protect humanity. His legacy was one of resilience, an unbreakable spirit that continued to inspire generations of warriors who took up his mantle as the defenders of the Imperium. Even as centuries passed, the name of Rogal Dorn was spoken with reverence, his life and sacrifice becoming legend among the Imperial fists and the Imperium itself. His dedication, his willingness to give everything for the Emperor, became a guiding light for those who followed. For Dorn was more than just a primarch. He was the Praetorian of Terra, the indomitable guardian who stood unbroken in the face of unimaginable darkness. His teachings, his legacy, were woven into the very fabric of the Imperium, a reminder that there are those who will stand and defend humanity, no matter the cost. In the end, Dorn's life was not one of glory or triumph, but of unyielding service. He had been forged by duty, defined by loyalty, and in his sacrifice, he had left a legacy that would endure for millennia. His warriors, the Imperial fists, continued his work, carrying his teachings into every corner of the galaxy, fighting with the same strength and dedication that had defined their primarch. Rogal Dorn's spirit lived on in the walls of Terra, in the hearts of his legion, and in the resolve of every soldier who stood for the Imperium. His memory became a part of the Imperium's soul, a silent guardian that would watch over humanity for as long as the galaxy endured. Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, was gone, but his legacy, his iron will and unbreakable loyalty, remained eternal, a force as steadfast as the fortresses he had built. For as long as there were those willing to stand against the darkness, Rogal Dorn's spirit would live on, a testament to the power of loyalty, sacrifice, and the enduring hope of a united humanity.